Hi, everyone, and welcome to this third voluntary PAC session. I see we still have a few other PAC members who we are still admitting, so maybe we'll just wait a minute before we get started. All right, well, we can get ourselves kicked off here as people are still joining. It looks like we've got quite a few folks already. Thanks so much for joining us for this is our third Voluntary Congestion Pricing Policy Advisory Committee session. Each of these are special sessions that we developed to address some of the questions and things that PAC members were interested in hearing more about at our first few PAC meetings last year. This third one is about the data and modeling. If you could, well, actually, this is fine. The data and modeling tools that we have at our disposal that we're planning to use in part in our evaluation of different potential congestion pricing scenarios, so that folks can learn more about those and we can talk through any kind of questions and how we might use them. And I just want to also acknowledge, as I said in our last PAC session at the beginning, that we are certainly in unprecedented times, and we're aware that not only is there no congestion on our streets at this point, but that people are really struggling as we all adjust to our new reality and try to deal with the economic circumstances and also just trying to keep ourselves and our families safe. Recognizing that we want to be kind of sensitive to that, but also know that in the past, San Francisco's economy has been resilient, and that we have gone through periods where there were recessions and other really challenging times, and that then we have returned to a stronger economy where issues like congestion and the related challenges of health and safety and equity were really kind of roaring back. And so in the spirit of making sure that we're able to prepare for that to happen, we are continuing with this study, and we're also continuing with these Policy Advisory Committee meetings currently. So we have paused our community outreach given the circumstances, and we're planning to pick that up again when the time is right. And we're continuing, though, with the technical analysis that we're able to do now, and then also, again, continuing with these Policy Advisory Committee meetings. And our next Policy Advisory Committee meeting of the full PAC, back to a regular session, is on April 30th. So there's more information on our website at sscta.org/downtown about that. Those are the main, I think, introductory points I wanted to add. We do, of course, appreciate your patience in bearing with us as we do our second one of these virtual sessions. We're sure that not everything will possibly go smoothly, so thanks in advance for bearing with us. In terms of the agenda for today, we'll start off with some logistics in terms of how to use the platform and make sure that it's as seamless as possible and everyone is able to participate. So we'll talk through some of that. We'll do some introductions of all the PAC members, and then we'll go into our presentation, sharing information about the data and modeling tools that we have at our disposal to see how different congestion pricing scenarios could be meeting our goals and objectives more or less. And then we'll open it up for discussion among PAC members. And then lastly, we will have time for public comment at the end. And members of the public, and we'll go over this, are also, or PAC members are also welcome to chat to the team here, and we can, any questions that you have as we go along that we can then answer later. So that's our agenda. I am Colin Dentalpost, and I'm the project manager. So I'll be facilitating this session as we go along. Helping to manage on the technical side will be Paige Miller, who is on our communications team, and also Abe Bingham. And so if you have technical questions and you're able to use the chat function, you can chat Paige and Abe, and they can help you out with any of those. And so with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Paige to go through a few of our instructions for how to use the Zoom platform.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, so for anybody who is a little bit newer to Zoom, we just wanted to show you a couple key functions. So if you're on your computer on your main screen, you can see the participants button as well as the chat button. So if you click the participants button, that will show you who's all in the meeting, and in the chat button, that will give you access to contact the project team with any tech support questions or with any project-specific questions you have throughout the presentation. Next, if everybody's on mute right now, but during our PAC Q&A session and public comment session, you can go ahead, we'll unmute you, but you can see in that bottom left corner whether or not you're muted. And similarly, you can turn your video off and on in the bottom left corner. And if you're joining us on the phone, you can dial *6, let's see, there we go, to mute and unmute yourself. And similarly, on the Zoom dashboard, you can see where you can raise your hand, and that will let us know if you have a question or a comment to add. And if you're on the phone, you can dial *9, and we, the hosts, will see that you have your hand raised. And there's the chat box right there at the arrow. So for our PAC members who are joining us today, it would be great if you could go ahead and update your name in the chat dashboard, just so we know who you are. And you're welcome to add the organization that you're affiliated with as well. And if you're a member of the public, you're welcome to do that also. And for PAC members throughout the presentation, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll know to call on you. And throughout the meeting, members of the public are also welcome to submit questions that they have to us via chat. And you can also direct message Abe and me, and you can see that there's like the word tech next to our name. So that might remind you if you forget who to ask. And there will also be a public comment period at the end of the meeting where we will see that members of the public are raising their hands, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask us questions as well. And if you're having trouble, you can go ahead and let us know in the chat, or you can text the number on the screen, and we can go ahead and help you out that way.
Okay, so just to do some quick introductions, again, I'm Colin, and I'll be leading us through this. There are some other Transportation Authority staff on the line as well. So aside from Paige and Abe, we also have Drew Cooper, who will be our presenter on data and modeling. He's in our technology data and analysis group. And then we also have Rachel Hyatt, who's also with me in the planning division at the Transportation Authority, and Eric Young, who's also in the communications group. I think those are our key staff to introduce. I did also want to say, let's see, I think maybe then we can just move to PAC member introductions. So if you can, as members of the PAC, it would be helpful to raise your hand, and then I can call on you individually and unmute you so that everyone isn't trying to introduce yourselves all at exactly the same time. Bruce, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, this is Bruce Agate. I'm with the South Beach Rincon Mission Bay Neighborhood Association.
Great, thanks. Bruce, go ahead, Haley.
This is Haley Courier. I'm Policy Advocacy Manager with Transform.
And Peter Strauss.
Yeah, hi, it's Peter Strauss for San Francisco Transit Riders.
Great, thanks, Peter. Go ahead, Bree.
Hi, Bree Casperson from the Union Square Business Improvement District.
And Brian, go ahead.
Hi, Brian Hagsman, Vision Zero organizer with AUX San Francisco.
Great, and Zach.
Yeah, Zach Deitch Gross, campaign and membership manager here at San Francisco Transit Riders.
Thank you. And, oh, I'm things in the wrong order here. Amit.
Yeah, so I will be replacing Ami Eldon from UCSF on the PAC.
Great, thank you, welcome. Let's see, okay, those are all the hands I see raised here. Do we have other PAC members here who have not introduced themselves? Chris, go ahead.
Hi, Chris Weiss with Yellow Cab San Francisco.
Thanks, Chris. And is that everyone? Are there other PAC members? If you're unable to raise your hand, you can also chat in the chat box, and we can introduce you, or I can unmute you if you do that as well. But we can proceed, and then if there are any other folks at the beginning of the discussion session, we can also do any further introductions at that point. So thanks everyone again for joining us. Really appreciate you taking this time and diving in with us. We as staff love to get into the weeds, so we're glad that you do as well. And so Paige is also noting that the slide deck for this presentation is also on our website if you aren't able to see it through our shared screen here. So with this, though, I'm going to turn it over to Drew to lead us through the presentation on models and data. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Colin. Again, my name is Drew Cooper. I'm in the Technology Data Analysis Division here at the SFCTA. I want to thank you all, PAC members and people from the public who took time to join us today. So today we'll be giving an overview about the modeling tools that we're using for this project, starting with what are models in general and why do we use them, moving into the specific models that we use here, and then talking about what data they use and how they work, and then finally how we're applying them in the study. So models are representations of the real world. they are used to produce estimates of things that happen in response to changing conditions or policies. They are planning tools that help us basically prepare for how things might change in the future. And they are developed and validated using real-world data. We use a model called SF-CHAMP. It is an activity-based travel demand model that simulates the travel behavior for all of the residents of the Bay Area, as well as other travelers, such as commercial fleets, for a typical day of travel. The model is capable of representing congestion pricing, including such aspects as different configurations where the boundary is whether you're assessed a charge for crossing it in one direction or in both directions, varying levels of prices, variability across different times of days, discounts and exemptions, and transit investments. And the model also produces many of the metrics that we are using in the evaluation of the congestion pricing project. That includes vehicle trips, person trips, delay, transit crowding, access to jobs, mode split, and vehicle miles traveled, among other things. So what's included in CHAMP? Most of the travel behavior comes from the daily travel of Bay Area residents. But we also account for travel coming from other sources, including interregional travelers who are workers and other people who are entering and leaving the Bay Area from counties outside. So this is going to be people commuting in from Sacramento or Stockton, for example. We also represent visitors who come to the Bay Area and stay in hotels and base their travel out of there. We have a model that represents light duty commercial, including local deliveries and services, as well as freight and trucks, which is heavy duty goods movement. You can see here that as a percent of trips in northeastern San Francisco, which is the area of focus for the congestion and pricing study, as well as for the entire region, the majority of trips comes from residents of the Bay Area, but those other sources do make up enough travel to make a difference in travel conditions. The data that goes into the model starts with travel diary data. This is data that we go out and we survey people and we ask them to fill out these detailed travel diaries that include one or more days of their travel where they record every single trip they make, as well as a bunch of attributes of that trip, such as where they went from and to, how they made that trip, and what the purpose of it was. We know that some people respond at lower and higher rates than other people. And so we actually design the recruitment of these travel diaries so that we are recruiting at higher rates the populations that are harder for us to reach. We also distribute these surveys through a variety of media, including paper, phone-assisted call-in, and online. Newer surveys are often also available through smartphone-based apps. And we also offer them in multiple languages. And finally, pay people incentives to participate. I want to highlight that for those of you that were there at our December PAC meeting, we discussed a particular survey that we had recently collected over 2018 and 2019. And that survey is actually not the one that we are discussing here. This is a different survey that was collected previous to that. It was the California Household Travel Survey of 2012. So we pull in this travel diary data. We also pull in data from other sources. One of the major ones that we have recently added is TNC data, where we obtained a detailed set of TNC data. TNCs, for those who are unfamiliar with the acronym, is the term that refers to Uber and Lyft. And the data that we obtained contains detailed travel records by origin, destination, and time of day. And we use that to understand TNC travel patterns in San Francisco over the course of a typical day. In addition to that, we also pull in observed traffic volumes and transit ridership by system and route. So when it comes to running the model, there are a set of inputs and a set of typical outputs. Those inputs are basically our assumptions about what the world looks like for the time that we are trying to represent. And so in the context of congestion pricing, we're using a year in the recent past, 2015. And so the things that we need to know about that scenario are what is the land use? So where are homes and jobs located? We include street networks, transit networks, bike lanes, bridge tolls, things of that nature. And then finally, households and people that are representative of households and people throughout the Bay Area, including demographic attributes. All of that goes into the model, and then what comes out are the travel records of all of these decision makers. So those travel records include trips by origin, destination, mode, purpose, and time of day. And the model also produces outputs that represent travel conditions on the road and transit networks. So this includes vehicle volumes, like how many vehicles on various streets throughout the city and region, transit ridership, vehicle delay, and transit crowding. The model, the CHAMP model, represents travel as a series of choices, ranging from long-term choices to short-term choices. So long-term choices are the ones that are typically made at a household level and are fixed for longer periods of time. So these include things like home location, work and school location, and vehicle ownership. Short-term choices are the ones that are made on a day-to-day basis. So starting with a day pattern, one would choose how many trips they're going to make, what purposes those trips are going to serve. Then we would move into picking what the actual trip destinations are. So if you're making a work trip, your destination is not that flexible. You're probably going to your primary work location or one of multiple locations for folks that work more than one job. Other destinations, say if you need to make a shopping trip, those decisions are basically fit around the more fixed points in your daily schedule. Then those trips are assigned to a time of day, and then a mode is chosen. So how do we know that the model works? We do a pretty extensive process called estimation, calibration, and validation. At each point, making sure that what the model is producing makes sense. So this is just one example of a fairly high-level validation, looking at worker flows from other Bay Area counties into San Francisco and comparing the observed flows of workers to what the model estimates. And so you can see here that the model does a not perfect job, but like a pretty good job of correctly estimating where workers from each of the Bay Area counties are coming from. If we look at Bay Area level mode share, on the left is the observed modal breakdown according to the California Household Travel Survey, and on the right is what is estimated by the model, with the kind of pink colored slices representing drive trips. The yellow slice is transit, and the blue-green slices are active transportation, so that's biking and walking. So again, the model here is pretty close to what we observe. And then one of the other things that we look at is how things play out on the roadway network. Here we're looking at Bay Bridge volumes by time of day, both eastbound and westbound. And those are the two charts on the left, showing that the model does a pretty good job at matching these volumes by time of day in both directions. On the right is a similar chart showing time of day volumes observed and estimated for crossings of the San Francisco-San Mateo County line. So what does all of this look like when we want to try to evaluate a congestion pricing scenario? The way that we would do this is we would compare a baseline model run that doesn't have a congestion pricing intervention in it. In this example, we'll use the 2015 base year model run. And then we will compare it to a similar scenario that takes all of the same basic attributes, including the locations of homes and jobs and populations and the representations of transit networks. And we'll add to that the congestion pricing scenario. So in this example, the 2010 congestion pricing study, called the MAPS study, recommended a bidirectional cordon charge for Northeast San Francisco. It recommended a $3 charge, which inflation adjusted comes out to be a $4 charge nowadays, and then free at other times. The study also recommended a 50% discount for low-income drivers and zone residents, although the results that we're going to look at now don't yet represent those discounts implemented. So here we're looking at how those two scenarios compare. So the results here are both intuitive and consistent with what the previous congestion pricing study found. What we see is a reduction in peak period vehicle trips by 12%, which is approximately what was found by the MAP study. We see that during the morning peak period, the number of people coming into the congestion pricing zone declines by about 2%. That's less than the reduction in vehicle trips because some people were coming by other modes to begin with, and other people who were driving, many of those people will switch to alternative modes. So while there's a decline, the model estimates that it is less than the reduction in vehicle trips. VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, and VHD, which is vehicle hours of delay, also both decline. So we are currently, if we just want to take a step back and look at where we are in the overall arc of the study, we are in step 3, where we have, using feedback from the PAC and outreach efforts with the public, as well as our own internal staff thinking, developed a variety of program features that we want to examine, and we are in the process of beginning to evaluate those projects in what we're referring to as the screening analysis step of the study. That is going to wrap up at the end of step 3 in late April or to mid-May, wherein we will bring results of that analysis to our to the PAC in June. Following bringing those results to the PAC, we will take feedback from the PAC and from other outreach, and use that to take our results and narrow things down to a set of final alternatives for more detailed analysis. And that analysis is scheduled to be happening in the fall. So I will stop there, and I think we will open up for questions from our PAC.
Yeah, so similar to the roll call, and thanks a lot, Drew, for walking us through that. I have seen some questions popping up in the chat window, but I'd like to start with if folks want to raise their hands to ask questions. And I see we've got Peter has his hand raised. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I guess I'm unmuted. Yeah, I have a lot of respect and, as you know, a lot of experience with the CHAMP model. But what I'm concerned about is congestion pricing is so much sort of off the curve. I mean, usually what we're testing with the CHAMP model does not involve gross changes to the travel variables, as we experience them today. But congestion pricing is some pretty radical departures, and I'm concerned about applying the CHAMP model or any model without validating, or testing the types of assumptions that we're incorporating in the alternatives we develop. How do you test and validate the CHAMP model, for something like congestion pricing realistically?
Thanks for the question. So the CHAMP model is primarily sensitive to price and time. We have places in the Bay Area where bridge tolls, for example, are widely applied throughout the Bay Area. Express lanes are kind of increasingly implemented. And so, and in addition to sensitivity to price and time, the model also considers the demographics of people. So kind of holding all things equal, you would expect people with lower incomes to be a little bit more sensitive to price. At the same time, if you're holding kind of income to be equal, people with kind of more complex family structures might also be able to, you might expect them to have more sensitivity to time. So, so the travel behavior that we use in building the model is sensitive to the way that people make these time and cost trade-offs, both in terms of mode, but also what destinations they choose to go to and the time of day that they choose to go there. We obviously can't validate the results against observed congestion pricing in San Francisco because we don't have it yet. But the results that we see are pretty intuitive and hold up well against what we see in other regions. looks like Peter's trying to follow up.
Let's see if I can find Peter in my list here.
I can't.
There you go.
Yeah, it still seems like we're really crossing our fingers here. You know, I think, you know, maybe bridge tolls starts to come close. But, you know, even so, bridge tolls are a relatively marginal delta, you know, whereas congestion pricing, I mean, I'm all for congestion pricing, but the types of changes on daily activity that we're requiring of people are pretty much off the curve, you know, and it just makes me uncomfortable, you know, just assuming that, well, this looks like it makes sense, you know, and it's a challenge. I know there's nothing out there really to test it against, but I think we need to do more to have confidence in the model than just say, oh, this seems intuitively right.
Thanks. So again, I just want to reiterate, the model is designed specifically to look at how people make trade-offs between time and money. This project is different than anything we've implemented before, but at its core, it still is a time and money trade-off question. When it comes time to implementing the project, the last study recommended a pilot, highly likely due to similar concerns about feasibility. And so I don't want to speculate about what this study will recommend, but that will probably be something that will be considered.
And I might just add that like the intuitive results that Drew is referring to, you know, one of the things that we've looked at, like in the last session, was the results of congestion pricing in other cities. And so one of the things we've noted is that the results the model came up with, which was a different vintage of our travel demand model than the one we have today. But in our 2010 congestion pricing study, the results were pretty in line with the results in other cities. And I think I would also just add, in addition to bridge tolls, there are other costs that are accounted for in the model. Things like, for many people, it's very expensive to park when if they were to drive downtown. So the cost that a congestion fee might have would essentially be significant in people making choices. So people driving downtown, many of them are already making significant choices about how much it costs to drive and park if they're traveling downtown. Do appreciate the question though, and certainly we can think more when we get to the implementation phase as well about kind of the different ways we might do it. I do want to move on to, because Haley's had her hand raised. So go ahead, Haley.
Hey, thanks for all this, Drew. I just wanted to clarify on the slide where you showed the ground truthing versus the model of counties traveling into San Francisco. Contra Costa was particularly different. And I was wondering, compared to the rest, they're fairly similar, and then Contra Costa is twice as high observed than estimated. And I'm wondering why Contra Costa was so different. And if that's telling us anything about the model, it's just like a fluke of the data.
Yeah, good eye. That is definitely the county that we're the most off in. And we're a little, we're we're high in Alameda and we're low in Contra Costa. On net, that kind of makes our East Bay a little low. So something that could be improved, but is a relatively smaller travel market.
Unmute now. Just
Go
to
ahead.
follow up, I'm wondering if there's any connection between the broader, and this might be beyond the scope of the model, but the fact that folks are basically commuting from the mega region through the East Bay, and if that's impacting this data.
Yeah, the model does account for extra regional, mega regional travel. That's not on this slide, but it is in the model. Are there other PAC members that have questions? Go ahead and raise your hand. And I don't think I see, it looks like I don't see any other PAC member questions in the chat window here. All right. If you're all thinking about any further questions for just a minute longer, we can also move on, if there aren't further questions right now, to public comment, and then if PAC members have further questions, we can also circle back to those as well. All right. Well, let's do that. All right. I am having a technical difficulty in which my cursor is disappearing, which is not helpful. If PAC members could raise their hands, and I might ask, I don't know where my cursor is. I might ask Paige if she can call on folks who are members of the public.
Yeah, I don't see any hands raised right now, but I do see some questions in our chat box that I could go ahead and read out. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So one question from AGP in our chat says, has the impact under congestion pricing been modeled for the zone that is just outside the cordon? It is substantially likely that a number of balloon squeezing effects deliver devastatingly negative driving and parking impacts to the region outside the cordon, which may even extend to create a new congestion barrier to entering and exiting the congestion zone itself.
Yes, that's a good question. That is something that we intend to look at in our evaluation. All right, my cursor has decided to reappear. It looks like we have another question here from Shruti Malik. That's what would the process be for identifying the long list of program features and screening it to a shorter list? Will all these scenarios be evaluated using the SF-CHAMP model to the extent possible? So maybe I'll start with that, the broader question, and then also have Drew chime in.
So the long list of program features, this is not going exactly as we had planned initially, because we had started doing some great outreach right before the pandemic started, where we had started doing some co-creation workshops with communities of concern to try to get ideas of different program features that people would like to see as part of a congestion pricing program. We have also gotten some ideas from our PAC discussions, and we've also done a number of one-on-one sessions and done a congestion survey. So we have gotten a variety of ideas so far. Our intent had been to finish the first round of outreach sort of as we're building the list of program scenarios that we're going to put into the screening for this first, sort of before this first round began or as it's beginning. We are, what we're trying to do to sort of flip things around and do them a little bit in parallel as things are evolving here, and we had to put a pause on our outreach. So we are starting a screening process with some different ideas that we've heard already from different stakeholders, and also some ideas that we think would, are either tested things that have been suggested before, or are ideas that are used elsewhere for congestion pricing, to try to build out a long list that we can at least start doing some technical analysis on. And then when we circle back to outreach, we may need to add things as we hear them to the list we're starting with. So the process of evaluating scenarios may be a little bit more of an iterative process. And there are also things that can be ideas that we can put in scenarios that are model, sort of things that our model is sensitive to, and things that the model wouldn't be as sensitive to in terms of different kind, like street repaving might be something, for example, that people might want to see that our model isn't going to show that there are big changes in how people are getting around if the street is repaved or is rougher. But that's certainly something that people might be interested in, just as kind of one kind of example of things like that. So there may be things, in other words, that people may suggest later also that aren't kind of modelable, and we can evaluate them separately. So that was a long answer to a question about a long list. But maybe Drew, you can add to kind of how the model will be used to look at the different scenarios.
Sure. So we have developed an approach for our model-based screening analysis, where we've started by kind of identifying all of the program elements that we're going to look at. We identified those elements through both kind of internal work reviewing what other cities are doing, and through our outreach processes. But the basic approach is that we will first kind of look at what we're calling the basic design. So like, how is the fee assessed? Like, which is it an inbound cordon charge, an outbound cordon charge, bidirectional, peak direction, an area charge? We will then, well, let me back up. The project has a bunch of goals. And so, and we're using those goals basically as a way to evaluate which scenarios work and which ones don't. So starting with the basic design, we will try to identify the right price point that basically gets you to 15% vehicle trip reduction. Once you have identified for a particular configuration what the right price point is, then we would look at what types of discounts and exemptions might be appropriate. The things that are currently planned to be under consideration are kind of means-based discounts, discounts for people that live in the zone, and a couple of, I think there are a couple of others. That is going to basically have some effect on what the, if you give discounts to a group of people, depending on how big that group is, it's going to have some feedback with the reduction in congestion. So then we will kind of redial in the right basic price, and then evaluate those scenarios along our other metrics. We will consider whether or not alternative pricing is appropriate for TNCs. And then finally, we'll look at transit reinvestments. So those are the basic steps, and they're basically designed as a way to explore a limited set of features, figure out the right configuration of those set of features, add in other features, and then kind of narrow things down again, and do that iteratively so that we're not testing like 100 million different things. And I will just add that this is actually a little bit getting ahead of ourselves. And so if your head is hurting with a narrative of this, we actually do have a graphic and are planning to have more discussion of this at the next PAC meeting on April 30th to really talk through with PAC members kind of what the scenarios are that we're thinking we should evaluate in this screening round, and what the process is to do it. So so this is just a little preview, but there will definitely be more opportunity to talk through that, and with visuals that are hopefully helpful in trying to understand how we're thinking this will work. I see that Barbara has her hand raised. Go ahead, Barbara. Barbara, if you're, oh wait, I did not successfully unmute you. Hang on a second.
Unmute, oh here, can you hear me now?
Go ahead.
Okay,
yes,
hi everyone.
Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Thank you for having this and organizing this. I really appreciate that. I live at Portside, which is at Bryant and Embarcadero, right next to the Bay Bridge. I've lived here for 26 years. So I've really seen, and I've been a San Francisco resident since 1980 and so forth. My whole existence is this neighborhood. I go to my Bay Club, I go to the farmer's market, I work for BART, I walk to work. You know, and I rarely drive because it's already pretty bad, but when I do, I need to go in and out. So, I know it's really difficult to model something because I think that our congestion area is very unique. It's like in the core. I mean, it's like downtown London, but then we actually need to get through this core to get onto the bridge and get to other outlying areas of San Francisco. And besides, the city in the past 25 years has concentrated everything in and around this neighborhood. So the financial district on weekends and after 5 o'clock, it's essentially vacant. There's no one going in and out there except for going to restaurants. But here, everything is here. And it's really great and very vivacious and so forth. So, I think that the modeling should better reflect the residents. There's more and more residents getting into this neighborhood, and the whole SOMA. The East Cut Community Benefit District represents about 30% of the whole SOMA congestion area. And the East Cut represents property owners, and the residents. And so I think that there has to be more current, and there's different stratifications of kinds of residents socioeconomically. There's a lot more seniors and elders that are actually who had second homes here. They're not actually moved into the condos here that they've had for 20 years. And so I think that there needs to be more representative of the current use of the area. And also on weekends or on game days with Chase Center down the street, there's congestion 24/7 on weekends when there's protests, when there's parades, when there's runs, you know, the Beatty Breakers. I mean, this whole area gets to be like this microcosm of impact. So I don't think that you can just talk about workers coming in. There's more delivery now than ever. While with this COVID situation, there's not as much delivery, but you know, like our building is 26 years old, and we never did even think about how much deliveries it is, and our own building is trying to figure out how to manage all the deliveries that we get now. So I was wondering how you were going to integrate all of that besides car shares and the charter buses. So how would you integrate those aspects of the modeling? And the model is like, you know, for 2010, that's like, you know, 10 years ago. It's so obsolete. This area has exponentially grown. Not only that, is that there's a lot of livable street improvements that are being done, like Fremont, 2nd Street has been done. Not Fremont, but Folsom Street. They're narrowing and building bulb outs, and they're going to do that to Harrison Street too, and all the side streets. And so there's less lanes available. So how is that all going to be implemented in a current traffic modeling in order to figure out the peak, non-peak, and pricing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I should clarify, so the travel survey is from 2012, and that is the source of data that we use to basically help us understand how people make trade-offs between time and cost. We actually update the other elements of data in the model a lot more frequently. So when we represent the population and employment and jobs and transportation networks and modes that are available, like Uber and Lyft, those have all been updated to reflect more current conditions and have been validated to more current conditions. And so that is how we account for changes over time when we might like to have more typically, travel diaries are collected every 10 years, and that's because they're quite expensive and require a lot of interregional coordination. We've actually gone out into the field and collected data more recently and are preparing that for use. So these are a number of the things that we're doing to kind of make sure that that our model is accurately reflecting current conditions.
Thanks, Barbara and Drew. It sounds like Paige has some other chats that have come to her and a technical announcement. So why don't you go ahead, Paige?
Yeah, we just have a note from one of our participants that it's possible that you'll see your raised hand button in the chat box. If you're having trouble, find it. If you're having trouble looking for it, go ahead and look for it there. And if you're still having trouble, you're welcome to, maybe Drew can toggle to the side with our phone number on it, so you can text us if you have any questions or technical difficulties. If you'd like to raise your hand, you can reach us there. And then a question from Harrison Peck is, has the timeline been updated in light of COVID?
So yeah, I can respond to that, and this is another item that we're planning to have more thorough discussion of at our next PAC meeting on April 30th. Obviously, things are very different than they were when we started the study, and in fact, even sooner or more recently than that. So there are, on the one hand, conditions have totally changed, and on the other hand, we are expecting that congestion will return. And so there are kind of some aspects, that might encourage us to continue and move forward and think about what kind of future we want to return to once this pandemic and recession and congestion have passed and the congestion returns. So kind of doing some of that future thinking and trying to envision what kind of future we want. And on the other hand, there are definitely challenges with, looking out and talking to folks who are in really difficult circumstances and may have a hard time engaging on this question. And we know that really getting strong engagement from folks all over the city and region, and particularly from people who are in communities of concern and in some of the most challenging circumstances, who are also likely to be kind of the worst hit from this disaster, just like people are often the most vulnerable to any kind of serious problem like this when they're already struggling. So we know there are a number of challenges with continuing, and so that's something we definitely want to talk to the PAC and our stakeholders and the co-hosts as well that we've been in communication with previously about holding co-creation workshops in communities of concern. We want to talk to kind of everyone and all of those stakeholders and potential co-hosts about the capacity that they have and their communities have to be having this conversation right now. So, so I think we see some reasons to proceed if we can, but we also want to make sure we're having the conversation about whether and how and when is kind of the right time to be doing that outreach and making sure that we're doing it at an appropriate time and in an appropriate way. So that's a conversation we're going to keep having. I am trying to remember if there was another part of that page. Was that the whole question, or was there more to it than that? Or did you have another question as well that you had received?
That is the whole question. I do have some other ones. One question, and forgive me if this has been asked, I've been kind of multitasking. Question about the model. This is from Spencer S. Does the model differentiate downtown drivers, such as commuters, service workers, taxi, Uber, Lyft, et cetera?
Yes, the model represents people traveling for work and other purposes, as well as modes like Uber and Lyft and a commercial delivery traffic.
Okay, we have another one from AGP, and go ahead and stop me. I don't think this one's been asked. The inputs to the model over time include available roadway resources. Is there an available quantification of lane miles or lane miles speed limit to help evaluate how much of the current congestion we experience comes from increased traffic and how much is generated by accumulating roadway restrictions?
Yes, there are inventories of roadway lane miles. We did, our agency also did recently some recent work looking at changes in congestion due to changes in conditions in the real world, specifically looking at how population, jobs, changes to the network, including road diets and roadway reconfigurations, and the growth in Uber and Lyft trips has contributed to changing congestion in San Francisco. And that can be found on our website under TNCs and congestion. The high level takeaway is that roughly half of the change in over the period of 2010 to 2016, roughly half of the increase in congestion was due to economic trends, so growth in population and jobs, and the other half was attributable to Uber and Lyft, and a very small slice was was due to changes in the roadway network and provision of lanes.
Okay, another question. Have you modeled alternatives to congestion pricing, like increasing lane availability or increases to corporate/public parking fees/taxes to allow metric-based comparisons of congestion pricing with other alternatives?
Yes, we have looked at parking pricing strategies, a variety of transit investments over several years. In fact, the parking pricing study that we did was a response to a similar question following our 2010 congestion pricing study. The parking pricing study determined that you could in fact reduce driving to downtown to some degree, but not to the same degree as you could with congestion pricing.
And I'll just add to that as well that one of the findings in our existing conditions and also from other work that's been done is that even with all of the planned transit investments that are supposed to come online, that given the expected growth in San Francisco and around the region, congestion was still anticipated to get worse over time. Of course, that work did not assume a global pandemic, so it's in that sense a little outdated, to say the least. But we assume that if the economy were to return, that would probably still be the case. But in any case, that those kinds of investments certainly are helpful in providing lots of options, but they don't necessarily solve the congestion challenge as well as congestion pricing would.
Another question, why is 15% the ideal decrease in congestion? This is from Zach from SF Transit Writers.
Yeah, I can respond to that. And 15% is admittedly not an entirely scientific number. The reason, and this comes from the goals and metrics that we presented to the PAC in the meeting back in February. But the reason we proposed a target of reducing vehicle trips downtown during peak periods by at least 15% is because that is in line, although a little higher, with the 2010 study that we did of congestion pricing that showed that the proposal at the time could reduce congestion by, or those vehicle trips by about 12%, and that would have significant reductions in delay and speed up transit by 20% or more in both cases, and also have significant other benefits in terms of safety and pollution and so forth. So congestion until this year had at least had grown significantly since 2010, and so based on that and also the results in other cities around the world, we picked the target of 15% because we think it would be able to make significant progress towards the four main goals that we identified together with the PAC's input of reducing traffic and getting it moving, improving safety, cleaning the air, and advancing equity. So that's kind of the high-level answer there. Anything else from coming your direction, Paige? Or if not, we can pop back over to hands raised.
Sure, yeah, let's do one more comment before going to hand raises.
Sure.
So it seems like a great deal of your input data is significantly outdated. according to Colin. The parking pricing study is from 2010. The congestion source study is from 2016, before many of the road diets and other lane restrictions were implemented. For example, 8th Street, Brandon Street, Van Ness construction, etc. Please comment on how you expect to get up-to-date data before making a case for congestion pricing.
So we actively track changes in the roadway network and have, we're actually currently working on building a 2020 scenario that represents land use, population, jobs, and networks that are reflective of conditions today. Although now there are some obvious challenges with representing what conditions today are, but the network side, road diets and changes to networks are a little bit more concrete, and so the way that we do it is we just go out and do an inventory of the projects that have been completed the year that they're complete. We also look out into the future to projects that are planned and have expected years of completion. And that is how we account for both current changes that have happened recently, as well as ones that are anticipated over the next few years.
Okay, so let's go back over to raised hands. I see Chris has your hand raised. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi. So there are a few studies that show the increase in congestion since 2010 is due in large part to the emergence of TNCs. Have you guys looked at teasing or separating out the TNC trips from this data, and whether or not without them congestion pricing would be required, or would that be a level of congestion that the city's infrastructure could handle?
That is a good question, and it is one that that we have been asked before. We don't have any authority to regulate supply of transportation network companies. We may consider looking at specific pricing approaches to TNCs, though.
All right. Thanks, Chris. And it looks like we have another comment from Barbara. Go ahead, Barbara.
Hi. Yeah, at our last meeting, I mentioned about including the Embarcadero. So in your modeling, what is the perimeter of your modeling, the area? Because if people are going to start avoiding going into the congestion area if it doesn't include Embarcadero. So, I foresee on weekends and even during weekdays, during regular morning and afternoon and noon time, it's just jammed. So I think that Embarcadero should be included. What's your modeling perimeter? Well,
maybe I can.
The boundary areas, does it include Market Street? Does it include Division Street, 14th Street?
Maybe I can start with that, and this really gets to the scenarios that we're going to look at more so than the tools themselves. I think that the kind of place that we've started and started talking in our outreach process, like with stakeholders in the co-creation workshops to get input on it, was the assumption from, or rather the recommendation from 2010, our 2010 study. And in that study, there was a lot of analysis of different boundaries that were smaller or larger in order to both capture the most congested areas of the city, but also kind of not overdo it. There's a little bit of a Goldilocks principle in general with size, because if you have too small an area, getting to one of the previous commenters' concerns, then it's easier for people to circle around the zone. So we want to make sure that it is large enough to really encompass all of the most congested streets in order, because we think that would be necessary in order for it to work. On the other hand, if it's too big, then there may be just a lot of trips kind of within the zone that aren't captured by the cordon. So that's the longer way of saying that in the 2010 recommendation, the area that was analyzed or recommended was the northeast part of the city, that had boundaries roughly at Laguna Street on the west side, 18th Street on the southern border, and then the waterfront, including the Embarcadero, all the way kind of around. So that includes all of the most congested areas around Soma and the financial district, and extending out into, for example, Octavia Boulevard as well. You would still be able to drive through from the Bay Bridge on the freeway, just straight onto 101. But if you got on or off any of the ramps within downtown, you would need to pay the fee. So it was really intended to kind of capture all of that, and not have people. I think you're right that if people were able to just go around on the Embarcadero, that might be an issue.
Yeah. Okay. So so that's a 2010 study, but then right now your congestion zone, Soma, is a much smaller area.
So we have not finalized a definition of what the zone would be this time, and I think we will. Our thinking is, we would want to probably analyze the same zone that we came up with last time, because that was the previous recommendation. But we are also interested in getting input on the borders of the zone and what. From, for example, neighborhoods around the edges of it, to potentially look at other options for what a zone could look like, to see, what else might be a workable solution.
So one of my question is, so ultimately in the feasibility study that you're going to finalize, are there going to be different options of potential zone managed congestion areas? Or might you have like maybe a zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and a big area of congestion management? You know what I'm saying? That if you enter a certain zone, that might be a little higher than another zone. I mean, that might be another idea, because certain little parts of a big area might have more congestion than others. So that might be a consideration maybe. I know it would be very tedious to try and figure out, instead of having one set boundary, and whenever you enter into that zone, it's like a set price of, I don't know, $8, $10. But then even within a subset of that, it might be a different surcharge, so to speak. Like for the BART system, when we develop extensions like going to San Francisco International or the Oakland Airport, that segment of the BART system has an extra surcharge because of the cost. So your tickets are more expensive going to the different airports versus or crossing the Bay Bridge has a different surcharge. So I mean, that might be something, to be considered maybe.
There are a number of different ways we're going to, we plan to look at charging fees, and we are at least sort of in the first phase, we're thinking of our analysis, we do want to look at ways that we could potentially, like some cities charge fees just to cross the boundary into or out of a zone, and others charge a fee also to drive within the zone, for example. So those are different ideas we can look at. We know, aside from just making sure we capture the congested areas so that the system works, we also know that it's important that it be hopefully easy for people to understand. So I think that's sort of there may be a sort of a technically perfect solution, but something else that's a little simpler for people to understand, that and clearer, that also is able to address the congestion issue.
Yeah, Yeah, and I know that one more thing regarding that. I know there's like arterial streets onto the bridge, like Harrison is a big one, or First Street, you know, and so maybe those might have some kind of modified cost or zoning pricing too, because it is an arterial, so you know, might be a little less. I don't know, but anyway, okay, that's it. That'll be good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other, I don't see any other hands raised. Paige, do you have any more comments in your chat box?
Nope, don't see any.
Great. I don't either from my view here. We do have a couple more minutes if anybody has a question popping into your head. Feel free to throw it in the chat box or raise your hand. All right, and I am not seeing any others here. If that is all the questions people have, then we can wrap up. I hope this was useful for folks. Really appreciate everyone joining us today, and hopefully this was an informative discussion, and certainly I think we got some useful questions and ideas. Really appreciate you joining us, and thanks to Drew for walking us through the tools as our local modeling guru, and for the rest of our team for helping manage this, even when my cursor was making itself scarce. Thanks to our PAC members for taking the time to join us, and we hope to see you on April 30th at our next full PAC meeting. So thanks.